Our most dedicated listeners may be wondering, why?
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 Why did we skip from episode 8 to episode 10? It's a long story, but suffice to say, episode 9 was lost.
Lost. Deep in the internet.
And is now found. So, without further ado,
here is episode 9, the lost episode.
Hey everybody, and welcome to Naturalistics, a podcast dedicated to helping you become a better naturalist. My name is Stefan, and here with me is Matt.
What's up?
And this month on the podcast, we're talking about Matt's recent trip to South Africa.
Oh yeah, South Africa.
Yeah, so Matt had the opportunity to travel abroad recently for a few weeks, and I'm going to ask him some questions about that. But before we get into that, Matt, you want to just update everybody as to the current podcast status?
Yes. So you can find us on Twitter, Instagram. You can email us at naturalisticspod@gmail.com, and you probably found us on iTunes or other places. So please give us 5 stars, give us some reviews, let us know what you think, get back to us, because we want to know about you too. So otherwise it's just us talking to ourselves, really. So hit us up.
Okay, so before we get into the questions, I think we should warn our listeners that Matt, in an act of, dare I say, momentary insanity, equipped me with a soundboard of sorts.
We took out some sound clips, made some sound bites out of them, and then I gave them to Stefan so that while he's interviewing me, he might drop some... Oh, what's that? Is that a go-away bird? Oh, man. Here we go.
So, something that listeners maybe don't know about me, Matt, is that, but that you know well, is I can get carried away with things like this.
Yes. The Barbalute suits is an example of this, which is a whole nother story, but...
So, I'll try and keep myself in check here, but I'm going to be peppering in some odd sounds to make Matt's mundane stories of his boring trip to South Africa sound a little bit more interesting.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, I mean, let us know what you think.
All right, so Matt, South Africa, you want to just... Most of our listeners are probably sort of North America based, maybe even more northeastern North America based, so... you want to talk a little bit, just speak a little bit about the landscape there and how it's different, maybe how it's similar?
Yeah, so I just went to South Africa, and it's pretty far away. It's on the African continent, as you probably can guess, and it's right at the tip of the bottom of South Africa. It is its own country, so South Africa is not just Southern Africa, it's its own country, and it's full of all different kinds of habitats. It's got arid, deserty kind of stuff. It's got savanna with all your crazy African megafauna like the lion, the leopard, the elephant, the rhino, zebra, or zebra as it's called, giraffes, all that kind of stuff. It's got some mountain ranges. It's got great coast with crazy great white shark things going on, whale migrations, birds. It's an amazing place. It's like a wildlife enthusiast's paradise, and I've always wanted to go there, so I'm just really excited to share some stories about it. And I know there's some people who were on that trip with me who might be listening, so shout out to you, whoever you are who's listening right now. Oh.
So Matt, one thing that listeners may not know has changed about you since you've returned from abroad.
Changed man.
You've returned to us a changed person. And one of the ways in which you've changed, perhaps most obvious to the onlooker, is that you are now never without a little notebook in your back pocket on which you are recording bird sightings. You're a lister now.
Yeah, so man, it's a tough one to break into to tell the world. I have a little embarrassment.
Oh,
is that weird? Is that weird? So I started life listing. I started making a life list, and I got an Excel sheet, and it's super boring and tedious and blah, 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 blah. But what I want to do is I want to know how many birds I've seen in my lifetime. And, I've done a fair amount of traveling to 4 different continents now, and I'm guessing my list is somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 species. I don't know exactly where.
Wow.
But I'd love to just know that and sort of get a sense of how many of the world's birds I've seen. And I'm also listing on a daily basis, like with the journal, like you're saying, or the notebook. I'm doing some e-birding. And eBird's a great website for keeping track of your sightings and also racking up those numbers. So it's just kind of a fun little game. I don't know if it makes you a better naturalist, but it definitely makes you get out more. And I think that's the main reason why I'm doing it now is because I did meet some people in South Africa who were really gung-ho, full-on, all-the-time birders. And they just knew so much, and they got out so much more than I do. And I've seen that here, too, in the U.S. of meeting people like that. And I've often snubbed my nose at listing as it's not true natural history or something like that.
Yes.
But really, when it gets down to it, they're getting out a lot, and I just was inspired by that, and I really want to be a better birder. And it's also I feel like I'm pretty good, but that listing and doing that kind of stuff will get me those those percentage points higher, being better as a birder.
So you're getting out of an old rut.
It's quite a rut, but I'm excited about it. And if you're interested in creating a life list, I definitely recommend doing that. Maybe we'll have an episode about it at some point.
And I would just like to add that if you're not interested, don't force it.
I agree. It's not good or bad either way. And like I said, it doesn't necessarily make you a better naturalist to list or not to list. I'm not really sure.
Let's keep beating this dead horse.
No. Let's stop. Let's stop.
Matt, so South Africa is, I would imagine, a very different place. Would you please just describe for us, describe the landscape, kind of set the scene for us?
So when I got off the plane, in Hoedspruit, South Africa, which is on the western side of South Africa, in kind of an arid savanna area, it was pretty stark contrast to summer in Maine, which is quite lush. And over there, it's just so dry. It was winter there, not very cold really, but just dry. And there's nothing green. It's all browns. It's all just different shades of brown, maybe some hints of red here and there. The soil is there's nothing in it. The trees are just scraggly, and there's dead grasses everywhere. And it's just it looks like a freaking bomb went off there. I'm not going to lie. It looks like a nuke went off. But you're looking around and you're but there's a herd of 20 elephants. And there's 7 giraffes. Oh, there's a pride of lions. It just gets insane how much wildlife there is. And everywhere you turn, there's 12 different kinds of antelope. Whereas here in Maine, it's hard to see mammals. It just is very difficult. You might hear some birds when you're out in the woods, but it's just hard to see mammals that aren't like squirrels or something like that. And that's the gray go-away bird there, which you hear all the time in Africa. So there's also all these birds too. Mm-hmm. And so my point is, it's just weird to go from an area that's so lush without very many mammals to a place that's so arid and barren, it's seeming, and has an absurd amount of large mammals. So that's one thing, like the lion.
Matt, how much of that do you think is a result of, what influences what? Is it the barren landscape is better habitat for, which came first, the chicken or the egg kind of question? Is it because of the heavy impact of all those large mammals that the landscape does look like a bomb went off? Or
good question. Yeah,
I'm just curious, how is the impact, of those animals reflected in the landscape or not? I mean,
when you're, at least, my experience in South Africa was that in these areas where there were a lot of wildlife, a lot of mammals, a lot of antelope, elephants, rhinos, just the you name it megafauna of Africa, there was so much scat on the ground. You literally couldn't step somewhere without there being animal scat. I'm not even joking. And it just made me think, there's probably more biomass in the crap on the ground than there is on the plants. So that's just one example of like, yeah, there's a huge impact, right? I mean, that must create a crazy dynamic in the ecology. But I just want to pause there and say, nature's complicated, right? I mean, it's just really hard with these ecological questions to say, oh, well, it's caused by the trophic cascades. I mean, it's caused by some kind of ecological, like, you can't, it's hard to point to one thing, really.
Yeah.
It's hard
the question is too simple.
but it's a good one still. And it's complicated because in here, in lush Maine, you say, where are all the mammals? And you got to think historically on that question and ecologically. So what's going on right now may indicate why there's not very many mammals. But also, I think probably based on the fossil record, there probably used to be a lot of mammals here that aren't here now. And that the forests and the ecosystem kind of are without some of these large mammals, and that has its own effects too, right? But at the same time, I don't believe that there were as many. Also, you have to look at, how close are these to the equator? How much can the producers in the ecosystem, do they get enough? How much of a photo period do they get to produce, during the whole year? Where here we have winter, right, which is probably a huge impact on the amount of megafauna that you can have. So there's just a few of my answers. It's pretty complicated, but interesting.
Yeah. So maybe zooming in, what about some of the small inhabitants of South Africa that maybe don't get as much good press in nature media? Tell me a little bit about the little guys.
Yeah, and man, there were so many cool insects and other creepy crawlies to see. I actually didn't see a single snake while in South Africa. It was winter, but lots of lizards, lots of different kinds of insects and stuff like that. Got to see an elephant shrew, which was pretty sweet. Yeah, elephant shrews. That's right. There's an animal called an elephant shrew. It's awesome. Check it out on YouTube or something like that. Also check out the go away bird. But one of my major takeaways in the little creature realm was the social insects and the termites specifically. Mm-hmm. So when you're in Africa and in these places on the savannas, there are termite mounds everywhere, like huge towering ones, like bulbous, like wide ones, small, like, basketball sized ones, like ones that are just like barely underground that you can tell are there. There's whole trees that are covered in castings of the termites where they're eating the tree, but they're covering it with castings so they can stay in the dark at the same time. It's incredible. And how much they're altering the landscape by eating these trees. And what they're really doing is they're taking parts of the wood and the tree and they're feeding it to fungi that live under the ground. So they're actually farmers, really. They're like farming fungus, or is the fungus farming the termites is one of my questions. But they're farming fungus, and then they eat the fungus or they feed that to their larvae and all kinds of stuff like that. But this has huge impacts on the landscape, right? Like, because you have all these other kind of animals that are trying to get into those mounds and eat them. And then you just so many, like, aardvarks and pangolins and all kinds of things. And then there's things that live in the old mounds that have been abandoned, like mongoose, warthogs, leopards, all kinds of animals use those mounds as they start to get older and decay. Huh. And not, on top of all that, of course, they're eating all those trees, and they're just such a landscape manipulator there. And you might not see them because they don't really come out. I maybe saw like 2 or 3 the whole like actual termites the whole time I was there, because they only come out at night. They stay in their mounds, and like I said, they kind of build castings around things to eat them. So they're very secretive, but they really have a huge impact. So, and one of the things is whenever I've traveled, when I traveled to Latin America, I've really noticed how impactful the social insects are. They just do so much. They change the landscape. They really are, in some ways, like the top dog in a lot of ways in these places. So, yeah, it's just cool.
All right, Matt. So why don't you tell us a little bit about some of your interactions with some of the wildlife there.
So yeah, there was some crazy things with being on a trip like this, and I just to take a pause for a second. I was on a trip. So first half of my trip was a guided experience with some really amazing, talented people guiding us, Kersey Lawrence and Lee Gutteridge. And they're two South African guides and trackers who have been doing this for years and years and years and years, and they're just really good at their jobs. And one of their things is that for us at least, our group was a tracking specialized, so a wildlife tracking group, really. And we got the opportunity to walk out of the vehicles, or like take a walk in the bush, as it were. And that was a really lovely and exceptional experience, being able to be on foot in this landscape where not everybody gets to do that, and we got to see a lot of things that we might not otherwise have seen.
From the safari vehicle, or...
Correct. So I'll just give you one story which really has changed my perspective, I think, and that is here we go, going back in time. One of the times that we got out of the vehicles, and we were looking for an animal to trail this particular morning, and we found ourselves on the trail of driving around and looking for a trail. We found a white rhino trail. Really cool tracks. And really fun animal to trail. Not as easy as you might think, but easy enough that it's like you can do it. You can find the rhino by trailing it, which we actually did in another story, another time, which was also epic. But we got on this, so we didn't end up getting the white rhino, but we got on the rhino trail, got out of the vehicles, and we started following it. There's some people who are in the front, they're in the point, they're trailing. There's people in the back. Lee and Kersey were with us, our guides. Lee had a rifle just in case something would happen. But we stayed close together, and two people in the front trailing. Everyone else is kind of just paying attention, right? When you're in the woods, in Maine, in New England, you got to pay attention to some degree. Like, oh, there's a tick on my leg. Let me flick that off or whatever. But other than that, you don't really have to pay that much attention. You can kind of be in your own little world. In the African savannah, not quite the same. You can't really just be lollygagging around when there's things like leopards and lions out there that can get you. So, anyway, back to it. So we're all kind of paying attention, and I like to pay attention anyway because I'm looking for birds, really. And I got to see some really cool birds on this walk. Sunbirds, for instance. I remember seeing a couple sunbirds on this walk, and they're amazing. They're kind of like a hummingbird analog of Africa. They almost look like a hummingbird. They can't hover like a hummingbird, but they're brilliant in color, and they pollinate flowers, and they eat nectar, and they have tiny little nests and all that kind of stuff. And they sound even like hummingbirds, those little kind of chattering.
Chittering noise, yeah.
So I remember watching this sunbird, and at the same time, I'm like watching the sunbird through the binoculars. I'm thinking, oh, what if something comes up right now? What if we're not alone out here? And I'm really tuned into those birds, right? Because the birds could tell you something pretty important, like that a predator is coming, for instance. But then we kept going, and I remember coming across some a termite mound actually with some dwarf mongoose tunnels in it, and Lee was saying, "Oh, you can actually tell the direction, like you can actually tell which way is south." Based on where the mongoose scat is on the mound, because they always come out in the morning and sun themselves on the south side, and they happen to leave their scat there. And so I think that's kind of cool. So you can figure that out that way. I remember learning that, and then all of a sudden, following this rhino, I came across another set of tracks, and these were lion tracks, and they weren't just any lion tracks. These were lionesses with cubs. So we all were a little nervous about that. Excited, but nervous. Because, this is almost the most dangerous animal to encounter in Africa. Maybe it is the most. Because those... Oh, God, Stefan.
Sorry.
Those lionesses are going to do anything they can to defend their cubs. So, knowing that, Lee and Kersey thought it might be best if we avoided them, which we all agreed with.
Makes sense.
But it seemed like the lions were going in a different direction than the rhino. And so they felt safe in that we could continue following the rhino. We would just pay extra attention. And if we were to come across any more tracks, then we might probably turn around. So we follow the rhino a little farther, going up this hill, and we start to find this area under this acacia tree where the ground has been compressed. So I remember I was standing there looking with my friend Dan, and we were looking at the tracks, and we started to piece together there's more lion tracks here. And where the ground had been compressed had actually been where a lion had laid down. So it was like a bedding area. But the thing is this bed where the lions had slept was extremely fresh. And pretty much right as we realized that, we heard this. We heard the lion roar, like the growl of lionesses, and they just came right out of the bush at us, like crazy, like 50 feet away. They just were running. 3 lionesses were running at us. It was crazy, and it's just unbelievable. And so right as that was happening, Kersey gathers us up, and she's like, "Come together, come together, come together." And so we're all coming and clustering, so that we kind of create this group pack dynamic. And Lee's crazy. Lee, he goes out in front. He's like, "Hey, get the hell out of here!" And so he's yelling at the lions, and they're still coming. And then right as he yells, they turn, and they're kind of pacing. They're giving us that, like, those cat shoulders, and they're like 20 feet away. It was crazy close. And all of our hearts were just pounding like crazy. Then after that, we in our little human
phalanx,
good word, we slowly move in the other direction, away from the lionesses, and looking back to make sure they're not following. And they didn't end up following us. That was the end of that encounter. But it was amazing just to be there and experience an interaction with animals that could kill you, that could do some damage, and are natural predators of humans too. We evolved in Africa alongside these animals, and they're our ancestral predators. So they I think there's some amount of ancestral triggering happening there, where it's a amazing experience. And at the time I didn't feel that safe, but now I'm able, or I didn't feel that comfortable, but now looking back, I really cherish that story and that experience, as part of my experience in Africa. And also, I've always known that being in habitats, being in landscapes where there are predators, alters your experience of those landscapes. It changes the way you walk. It changes the way you look. It changes the way you think, because there's just a difference between being in a place where there's nothing that can get you and being in a place where there is. So it was just great to be able to actually experience that and really have that as a constant. Not, this is one story that represents that fully, but it is a constant. That when you're on these landscapes, that's part of it. So that was one thing of one interaction, and we had lots of other interactions that were more peaceful with leopards and elephants. Oh my God, elephants are amazing. Giraffe, all these animals, and rhino too. So yeah, that's one story.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Glad you like it.
You mentioned to me this idea of that there are plant kingdoms, that certain groups of plants are common sometimes across large areas of the globe. Talk a little bit about that, please.
Yeah, so one of the things that I learned when I was in South Africa is that there's a Cape Floral Kingdom. So after this 2 weeks with this guided tracking group, I spent 2 weeks traveling on my own out of Cape Town and up the coast to towards Namibia. And so one of the things I learned while I was there was that there's actually a distinct floral kingdom that's only in the Cape Town area, or only in South Africa, really. And that's unique, and it's part of only six floral kingdoms in the world. It's the only one that's in only one country. It's the smallest one. It was incredible. And there's really cool stuff like proteas that are only found there. And it's a huge group of flowers that are really only found there. And the reason why this is cool to me is that it helps me think about, it's a model that helps me think about plants around the world and where I'm traveling. So, for instance, like when I'm in Maine or in this huge Holarctic region, which actually goes across all of the northern hemisphere, really, that we have a lot of similar plant families across that entire region that goes from, Alaska wraps all the way around to Russia, on the other side, on the other side of the world. So through Europe and over into Russia.
Yeah.
So and comes pretty far south, down, pretty much covers all of the Americas, or all of North America. And that region has similar plant families. So Asteraceae, Fabaceae, some of these families. Pinaceae. I think Pinaceae might be one of those like ubiquitous families.
It jumps kingdom.
I'm not really sure exactly on all the details, but I know that basically these floral kingdoms are designed by these family groups. And what are the major families of plants that dominate, quote unquote, these floral kingdom areas? And obviously their geographic boundaries are very loose. In other words, they kind of fade into one another, and there's no distinct lines here. But I think it's helpful for when you want to learn about plants and you want to learn about plant families, is to know what floral kingdom you live in and what the dominant families of that region are. And so when I was in Cape Town, I got the experience of being able to be in a completely different floral kingdom and experience a lot of different plant families that I had never seen before. So, and I'm excited to learn more about that and to maybe make some content and do some stuff around, these floral kingdoms and using them to learn about plant families. So, for instance, if you live in like the Australian floral kingdom, which is its own floral kingdom, you might want to learn certain plant families first before others. You would want to learn different plant families, like prioritize them over other ones, that we would prioritize.
Yeah.
So
certainly it seems to me it makes the most sense to learn the things that you have around you first.
Yeah.
And
I think as naturalists, yeah, definitely.
Spend your energy in that way. So traveling abroad and plants are just one thing that we could be focusing on traveling abroad as naturalists. We talked a little bit about travel and as a naturalist traveling and things to think about, things to maybe do to prepare. Do you have anything that really stuck with you as good advice, perhaps, that you might like to share or reiterate that you found really worked for you on this particular trip?
Yeah, I mean, I think thinking back to our naturalizing out of your element episode, I don't remember which number it was, but one of the things that we said was that traveling in groups, like traveling with other people, is great, but also traveling alone is great, and it's good to be able to mix and match, and not just do one or the other. And I think this trip for me was a perfect example of that, where I got 2 weeks with an amazing group of naturalists and trackers to geek out with out in the bush for weeks. And then I got 2 weeks sort of alone time. I did spend, obviously I met people along the way and I learned, and I wasn't completely alone, but a lot of my naturalizing, a lot of my, naturalist explorations were alone, like going on birding trips alone, going botanizing, and I got to meet all kinds of new people and have different kinds of experiences, more solo time that way. And so I guess for me, it's like, in reflection, it's do it that way. It's really good. It worked really well for me to mix it up, to do solo and group time.
I know you kept a pretty regular journal while you were there.
Yes, yeah.
Would you like to just briefly touch on that and talk about how that's helped you in processing?
I haven't been the best journaler in the past couple of years at home, but when I travel, I do really like to journal. because it does help me with remembering, with keeping it locked into my memory, a lot of the experiences I'm having, a lot of the observations I'm making, and all the stories that I'm coming across as well. So, and also questions too. I often in my journals will write down, I'll do a question like brainstorm. So like I'll go through
Or vomit.
It's either a brainstorm or a vomit.
Depending on
brain vomit.
Your choice.
How
of
about
metaphor.
brain vomit?
Brain vomit.
So I use journaling to do a lot of the Triforce stuff, the curiosity, the storytelling, the observation. And when I'm traveling, I like to do that a lot. And I have a particular way that I like to journal, which maybe at some point I will put out there for everybody. But I'm happy with that. I get to do some artwork as well, some drawings, and that really helps me learn.
Well, it sounds like it's one good way to craft your story.
Yeah, to start crafting a story,
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Great, Matt. Well, thanks for sharing, and hopefully this encourages others to get out there and do some naturalizing of their own, whether traveling or right around your own local area.
There are antlions to be found almost anywhere in the world.
Ah.
Of course.
Yeah, antlions. Wow, that's a whole nother episode.
We could do a whole episode on antlions. Nah. All right, thanks for listening.
Journey with me to the world of wild babies.